about 18 months ago, we started going into our own science. That means we're not only the service provider, but we now have our own scientist team that looks at certain areas within the life sciences that could be commercially very valuable and develop our own products.
Hello friends, my name is Pavel, and on this channel I like to talk about science in the skies. And whether you're a scientist or a casual space fan, welcome and thank you for watching. In this video, I spoke with Mark Kugel, one of the co-founders of Yuri, a space biotech company with a mission to engineer end-to-end solutions to provide biotech products formed in space. Let's go.
3, 2, 1.
Mark, first of all, thank you so much for joining me today. I think we meet at a very interesting time in biotech history. And before we talk about Yuri, which is a space biotech company that uses microgravity environment of space to develop and manufacture biotech products, I'd really like if you can help me set the stage for our discussion by answering kind of the following question. It seems that the industry that I work in, biotechnology, it's no longer something that scientists do on Earth. So why does regular biotech really have to pay attention to the research and opportunities that now present themselves in space?
Yeah, great question. This is the question we asked ourselves since 4.5 years now. I mean, in the end, it comes down to a couple of factors that you don't have on Earth that you have in space. I think the most important one, or the most difficult to replicate, is gravity. Just think of space of being like a possibility to just switch off gravity or to lower it, or increase. Obviously, we can do on Earth, but it's just a possibility to play around with gravity as a physical parameter, just like you would take an incubator and set it from 20 degrees to 30 degrees, right? And that comes with a lot of very interesting effects. Nothing that is new to humanity. You know, we've been sending rockets like the ones behind you since about 50, 60 years now. And we had the ISS since more than 20 years. And that has created more than 2,000 studies in the life sciences, backing up with data what I'm going to tell you now. So one is on the cell culture side. You know, if you don't have gravitational forces, you have cell cultures that grow in larger structures, organoids, for example. You can do 3D bioprinting layer by layer and without the structure collapsing or without needing artificial scaffolds. And that's pretty easy kind of for people to wrap their head around. Same on the crystallization part. So both on the structure determination, if you have no sedimentation, no convection, you don't have the effect that you have defects in the crystal structure. And it also doesn't hinder the growth of a crystal. So what we've seen again and again on protein crystal growth on the ISS and other platforms is that you have larger crystals in better quality with less defects and also more uniform. You could find a better structure in space of an existing protein, just because you have a better image doing crystallography. But also, and this is what other companies are doing on the manufacturing side of things, if you look at reformulations and new morphologies, because you have more uniform crystals, and this is a potentially very interesting game changer in pharma manufacturing, taking existing drugs, finding new morphologies, and doing manufacturing like we couldn't do today.
I'm personally fascinated by protein growth, because that's my personal background, professional background is in protein production. So when I discovered that crystallography in microgravity is a completely different and offers a very different environment, that's part of the reasons I'm super fascinated about all the potential that specific application has in space. But I guess I wanted to ask you this. So outside of this particular experiment, maybe if you can set the stage for what does Yuri do as far as the types of services it offers for the research community, as well as for maybe larger biopharmaceutical companies or other companies in space. Kind of, what is your differentiating factor there?
Yeah, sure. So we started out until today as an end-to-end service provider to help scientists around the world take their biology, experiment, manufacturing use case to space and back. And back is really the important part here. Right, lots of people are talking about satellites and just sending down data. But in biology, we've never had any request where the scientist didn't want to have his or her sample back, right? That's super important. So just having that logistics part of things, but we also develop a very unique set of modular and reusable bioreactors where we have all kinds of cell culture units, we have plant units, we have fruit fly units, crystal units, right? So we really have the full range of typical biological experiments you would want to send to space. We can cover that. And by doing it modular and reusable and adding some more hacks to the system, we were able to bring down cost and time of such a space experiment by about 10x, which allowed scientists around the world to now do much more affordable and much more efficient research. Today, we have scientists in 22 countries on 4 continents to do space research due to the systems we develop. So this is pretty strong. So any scientist around the world who has never done any space experience before, you don't have to. We can guide you throughout the whole process, and we've shown again and again to bring newbies into that field and show amazing results with their research. In addition to that, we also do microgravity simulation on Earth. So we sell or rent out clinostats or random positioning machines. So these are devices for your lab on Earth. So you no space flight needed, but there's quite some interesting results you can already get with those simulations, because you basically trick cell cultures, for example, into thinking that they are in microgravity, because they just turn around in random motion, and the gravitational vector is never from just one side, but from all sides. So it's evened out over time. You can Google it. It's quite interesting what people have found out, especially in the field of tissue engineering. So this is kind of what we did or what we've been starting with. And have built a business of about 30 people today. What's potentially much more interesting is that about 18 months ago, we started going into our own science. That means we're not only the service provider, but we now have our own scientist team that looks at certain use cases, at certain areas within the life sciences that could be commercially very valuable, and develop our own products. So we leverage basically the tech we have built to build our own use case. We always take the SpaceX Starlink analogy. So SpaceX has built this amazing, rocket technology that are the most efficient and cheapest in the world. And now they leverage that to build their own satellite constellation, right? No one else can do it in the way that SpaceX does. No one else has a launch cadence. And we see it the same way that we leverage now our most efficient space lab tech to do our own bio Starlink, if you want, right? So we build our own use case.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that that's kind of that's the inspiration for doing that. And it makes sense. And part of the reason I'm super excited to speak to you and just learn about space biotech is science doesn't really exist in a vacuum. So in many ways, yes, there is experiments that you can do in microgravity, but they all have to have a certain sort of business outlook and application at the end of the day, because otherwise you're just putting money into the air, really, right? So what you're essentially doing is you're looking for actual tangible business opportunities that can come from removing removing the gravity from the equation and actually leveraging that specific platform. And a lot of scientists, and myself, I guess included, don't really appreciate that. You have to take that into account, because there are actually a lot of unique opportunities, as you mentioned, better protein crystals, better tissue cultures. A lot of those things can have a tangible impact, especially if you figure out the logistics. And I'm glad you brought it up, because when we met a couple of months ago at SynBioBeta conference, you mentioned a really funny story about bringing some of the samples to and from the space. And I was wondering if you can share that, because it was a fascinating story that a lot of people don't appreciate until they start dealing with that type of technology.
Yeah, probably it's been that lost bioreactor story. That was actually not doing Yuri, but it was still doing Airbus times, Before we founded Yuri, and we were working at Airbus doing a similar service, similar experience. And there once we had a mission where, export control dealing with like high tech cross-border, from Europe to the US and then to space and back is always a challenge. Especially, if we talk about hardware, software, you very often come into this typical ITAR, dual use discussion, which we don't have, but people ask that question, right? So they always kind of look at it more closely than if you, take whatever over the border. And typically we work with a carnet. That means you have a document saying, hey, I bring this to the US, but when I leave the US, I also have everything with me to bring it back, right? But this time, one of the astronauts forgot one of our bioreactors on the International Space Station. So we didn't have everything back. So that's the first part, which is really funny, right? You tell the kind of border control, oh, you know, I don't have it because it's currently in space and the astronaut forgot to bring it back. It even became worse because then the astronaut actually took it back to Russia with you know, another capsule that happened to land in Russia, right? So now you have to tell them, hey, it's not here, it's in Russia. And by the way, it went over space. So this is kind of, that was, you know, many years ago, I think like 7 or 8 years ago, but still a funny example of how space to Earth logistics can have their challenges.
I mean, just I guess a side note, did it get any easier if these kinds of logistics over the years? Is the regulation kind of starting to emerge, which helps to navigate these challenges, or not really? It's still a very nascent environment in many ways.
Not really, especially if you deal with new countries. We had one country that's on the other side of the globe to where we are, and you can make up your mind which country that is. And we wanted to have a cell culture experiment with them. And they were supposed to send the cell cultures from that country to the US, and then we send it to space. But the space law, which was developed, I think, in the 70s, says that although the chances are so tiny, if something happens with that payload that comes from this particular country and the ISS, for some reason, you know, deorbits, explodes, whatever, then that country is partly liable for that damage, right? And which could be, in theory, you know, ISS lands on a big city, whatever, you know, big catastrophe, then that country, because it has like 1 gram of that cells on it, in theory, potentially could be liable for that, which of course is very theoretical, but they wouldn't allow us to fly. So in the end, we just bought the cells in the US. So
wow,
those are current funny stories with new space countries entering the scene.
I came across a video not too long ago. It was to be honest, it was I was watching a newscast about the Luna 25 launch, and they had an interview of a Russian space lawyer, and I was like, what? But now apparently, as you mentioned, like figuring out logistics and kind of updating a lot of that legislation to regulate things going to and from, regulating maybe some potential satellite collisions and all those things is now, you know, much more prevalent type of conversation. And you have to have people who are actually educated in all those technicalities and actually help modernize a lot of that sort of bureaucracy and infrastructure that has been set up well before the advent of space biotech or just space exploration as we now have it in 2023. Do you see that kind of being one of the challenges that you and maybe other people in the industry will face over the next, at least in the near term?
Oh, for sure. The legal aspect of things is super like interesting if you're a lawyer to look at it, but also complex and painful for the ones who just want to build stuff and just want to, you know, push an industry forward. But of course, it's super important and it's super relevant to ask those questions because many of those questions we asked for the first time. You know, we've never had several countries on the moon that, you know, what about real estate there? Can you buy a lot or a house there? What about the whole, you know, space debris? There's no rules and regulations there with all the kind of negative effects that we see now. Same with the plastic in the ocean and CO2 in the atmosphere. As long as something is not regulated, everyone benefits from him putting stuff up, but no one, you know, is responsible for a downside. Then humanity has shown again and again that we're very bad at cleaning up our mess. I think we need some rules rather sooner than later for certain basic operational modes.
Yeah, so it's a lot of researchers actually, when they consider experiments in space, I would imagine have to deal with a lot of that, I guess, paperwork and things of that nature in order to enable their experiments in space. And presumably your company also has these sort of services or is part of that collaboration that you would do with customers. Is that true? Like kind of helping navigate that new world of logistics, if you will?
Oh, 100%. And this is exactly what we claim, that, you know, you take care of your science and we take care of everything else. So we want to have space lab research as close to Earth lab research as possible. It's still a long way, obviously, but we want to give scientists real-time analysis tools, like really high quality microscopes, all types of microscopy, so all the analysis tools, real-time comms, and we want to have the ability to adapt and change experiments while in space, like you would do in a normal lab on Earth, right? You just go there into the incubator, take out the sample, make some changes, and putting it into the incubator again. And we want to have all those capabilities, which are so convenient today on Earth, obviously on a robotic and automated level, and not with human interaction. But that's the goal. We made it much easier today already. I think as a scientist, you really don't need to have any background, but there's still a lot of potential to improve that even more.
Yeah, that's a key point, because a lot of I guess newcomers to space or space biotech industry really would probably feel very hesitant to consider doing any kinds of experiments, because they think, oh, I need to understand orbital mechanics or this and that. That's actually not quite true in many cases. And the more I immerse myself in that, the more apparent it becomes that everybody in the sort of space community almost says, like, if you're there to do science in particular, don't worry about the how, worry about your specific problem. We'll help you address that. We have the expertise, and that's exactly what you're saying, because it's to lower the barrier of entry to anybody and really accelerate the pace of innovation and bring forth the opportunities that space provides. I'm curious about your personal background. You not necessarily worked in biotechnology industry before, but what drew you to space, and maybe specifically to space biotech? Because there's a lot of things that you can do in space, but space biotech is a particular type of problem to tackle.
Yeah, it's not a startup idea that you have under the shower. I think space biotech could be something to start. I have a very unusual background for that. I mean, I've always been excited about space, since my dad watched the space shuttle launch. And actually, during my bachelor's, I intentionally decided to study it with Airbus, with the space division, with the excitement for, rockets and satellites. And I left it directly after my studies with the frustration of a big corporation, right? So you see the rocket in the kind of employer branding brochure, and then what you do is like helping in the procurement department, buying a screw for a satellite that will launch in 10 years or so, right? So this is the reality of like what we call old space. So government funded multi-year or sometimes multi-decade projects, and you're just one of 2,000 people doing a very, very tiny piece of it. Which if you take out the space of it, it's like a super boring job. But because it's space, it's still kind of exciting, but it just kind of didn't motivate me strong enough. So when I, after a couple of years of doing startups, I met Maria and Chris, who worked at Airbus much longer than I did, and they worked in the life science payload development department, right? So literally the people that developed the technology to help biology be safe and alive on the trip to space and back. And they always had that idea, hey, there's so much potential in the technology, there's so much potential commercially. These whole like NASA, ESA funded government missions are cool, but there's so much more we can do with this. So we chatted, randomly met on an event. My goal was to find team members for my startup back then, or for the startup I was just about to found. And then in the end, they kind of drew me away and say, hey, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard. What you're building, can we build a company out of that? And this is how Yuri got started. And they were still looking for someone with more like a commercial background who can translate the nerdy science, spacey stuff to commercial industries. This is how we started. And then from the beginning, we wanted to have that be a biotech company at some point. But we started with the service first, proving the world that we can launch stuff to space. Did that. And then, basically we were 7 or 8 space nerds asking investors, hey, do you want to give us money so we can hire a bio team to build a biotech company? It was quite far away from being a biotech company. But they did. I think everyone was so excited about the potential. And apparently they believed in our ability to attract, really good biotech talent, which we luckily did. And now we are more and more a biotech company, using space as our unfair advantage. But I think the the end market, and hopefully the big revenues in the years that to come will be from biotech products.
That's amazing, because now over the years, probably when you started Yuri, it's really been a journey where space biotech was not even a phrase that you would hear people utter, or at least maybe outside of some really small, tiny niche community. And kind of where we are now, sort of fast forward into 2023. There was a great video by CNBC recently about space manufacturing, and I've made a video about another space biotech company, Varda Space. So now it feels like there are other players in the industry, and that's healthy, because that means there's I guess healthy competition. There's niches to explore. There's business opportunities to try and go after. Sort of between various, let's say, other players in the space biotech field. For example, Redwire is another good company that's kind of very well established and has obviously some part of the business related in space biotech, and maybe Varda's Space. What is maybe Yuri's advantage specifically? How do you see the space biotech and what you're trying to accomplish as compared to some of the other players in this small industry now?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, we always say we don't build the complex, expensive infrastructure that can explode. So we don't build the rockets, we don't build the spacecraft, like, for example, Varda does. I think there's amazing companies out there that are building this already, and we can just book seats on those ships or spacecraft, right? And right now we talk to about 15 to 20 companies, from the big, like Blue, Axiom, Sierra, and so on, to also a lot of very agile and very cool startups that are building re-entry capsules, for example. So I don't think we need to build that part of the value chain. We can just partner with companies doing that. What we really focus on is everything downstream from the spacecraft. That means the whole life science infrastructure, that is the incubation system, make that as modular, as versatile as possible, have the temperature range, the ambient condition ranges as large as possible, and then have a very, very powerful stack of bioreactors that you can flexibly combine with a lot of variety. So right now we're building functional blocks for bioreactors that, in theory, you could have more than 2 billion combinations of, like, fluidic systems, pumps, microscopes, and so on. So it's a large, very, very large variety that we could offer potentially to scientists to do whatever you want to do in space. So this is what, is one big focus to nail that for our external customers, but also for ourselves. And then our focus on the bio side is right now very much on the synthetic biology side. So really, that's why we met at the SynBioBeta, right? So we use space as a harsh environment to let microbes adapt in very unique ways. And we help with the microbes, strains, compounds, proteins that we find in space to improve processes in SynBio on Earth, whether that's higher yield, better thermostability, and just taking the experience that we've seen as humanity. The enzyme from PCR was found in Yellowstone Park, and so many very interesting workhorses of biology were actually found in the harshest environments. They weren't developed in the lab, and we kind of take that mindset into, hey, let's send them to space, the harshest environment of them all, and let them direct adapt in very unique ways. So kind of hard to differentiate to each one of those companies, right? So Redwire is a big company focusing on everything from satellite space infrastructure to also a little bit of space biotech. They also are working now on their own bio research opportunities, to our knowledge, in a slightly different field. Varda is trying to build both parts of value chains, both the spacecraft and the manufacturing, which we find also super exciting. They're focusing right now very much only on the manufacturing side, on the crystal, morphology topic we touched upon earlier. So I think, as you said, everyone is kind of trying to build that industry together. And the mindset is very, hey, let's make the pie 10x, 100x bigger instead of fighting over a tiny government pie we have today. So it's really hard to really say, like, okay, this is a clear competitor, because every time it's always, for one project we're partner, for some projects, we might compete on certain areas. But right now the mindset is all, hey, let's get this literally off the ground and build this industry together.
I love that. So I guess more of a final question in many ways. There's a lot of excitement about research that goes to space. There's lots of news articles about this experiment or that experiment, how it might benefit. But after that news cycle kind of dies down for a lot of those experiments. There's very little fanfare about the outcomes of those experiments. Some of them may get published in papers. Some of them may be done by startups that they don't necessarily disclose that. Do you see that as a kind of something that we need to kind of do better at, or what have you noticed something similar? And maybe how does Yuri may want to address that, if at all?
No, I think that's a very important point, because in the end, how does a new technology get adapted? You need killer apps, right? Mm-hmm. You can build the App Store, or you can build the Apple II, you can build whatever technology platform you want to build. It will only be known, successful, and really long-term sustainably generating revenues for a company or for a whole industry if you have some killer apps that actually provide some value for customers on Earth or in space, but they have to be enough to pay the bills, right? So I think it's super important to show the world, hey, not only, hey, this could and potentially and maybe, and there's something that answers this and this question. This is all nice, and I agree with you. But 100% agree that in the end, we should focus more, okay, what's now the tangible outcome? Where's the customer that paid for what you have discovered in space? What's the product you've developed out of that? And we need much more of that. And I think that is where the focus is shifting slowly towards to. Right now, it's still very much, people are just excited sending the stuff to space, right? Obviously, the buzz in the beginning is so high, and we totally understand that, and we feel our customers when they want to do as much PR as possible before the launch and then short after the launch. But we also need to push what comes out of it in the end, bottom line. And this is where we focus on heavily right now.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So if researchers in biotechnology industry want to learn more about Yuri and discuss potential collaboration opportunities, what's the best way to reach you guys? What is the best method that you prefer to work with companies or with individual researchers?
Yeah, I mean, first step, obviously, just go to our website, yurigravity.com, one word. Yuri, like, Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, and then gravity, just one word. There's everything there on what you need to know. Then just reach out to us by email or just call us. You probably will meet us at the typical life science or also space conferences. We'll be at the IAC this year, so the largest space conference. We have a couple of bio conferences as well. So there's many ways to get in touch and talk about a space mission.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope Yuri is going to have tremendous growth over the next years. Certainly looking forward to staying in touch and learning about everything and all the exciting science that you will have going to space and bringing back. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.